Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Keeping Relevant. My guest, Jerry Goldfeder, is senior counsel at Cozen O'Connor and an expert on election law and voting rights. He also directs Fordham Law School's Voting Rights and Democracy Project and is a longtime friend. So welcome.
Great to see you again.
Thank
Good
you.
to be here.
Good. So do you and your project, to the students in the class, think that we're going to get through, we're going to uphold the democratic process this election?
Well, we're very hopeful. They're hopeful. I'm hopeful. I have two feelings about this election.
Yeah.
One is great optimism, and one is great dread.
Fear. Right.
Fear, dread.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of rules being put into place, essentially by the Republicans, who want to suppress the vote.
In state legislatures.
By state legislatures and by boards of election in various states to make it more difficult to vote and to make it more difficult for us to get a true and fair count at the end of the day. Now, we're in court in various places to try to lift those restrictions, but I think that at the end of the day, if enough people come to the polls, if enough people vote, and if the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, if she wins by sufficient margins, even in those states, then I think we'll be fine.
It's an incredible thing to see these different states with the majority parties really making these changes. Who keeps track of all the different states?
There's the campaign, of course, keeps track of particularly the battleground states, but all the states. We want to make certain that we know what the laws are in place so that we can educate voters as to how to get to the polls, if they need to register, when they need to register by, if there's early voting, if there's mail-in voting, and so on. So the campaign is in pretty good shape in keeping track of everything.
So we depend on the campaign, really.
Well, it's the campaign.
What about the Bar Association?
Well, actually, that's a good question. The campaign keeps track. The Democratic National Committee keeps track. And by the way, the Trump campaign keeps track, and the Republican National Committee, they keep track as well. And I'm actually privileged to be a member of the American Bar Association. We have a task force to protect democracy, and we keep track. And various local bar associations around the country also monitor what the laws and the regulations are in each state. So nobody should be surprised as to what the rules are when we get to Election Day.
Do you really think, do we really think that the democratic process is threatened?
Absolutely. He has said, Trump has said, I don't mean to use canned expressions, but he has said that he would like to, quote, terminate the Constitution. He has said that if he loses, it's rigged. So this is our 60th presidential election. They've all been peaceful.
When you say our 60th, what do you mean?
The United States of America,
United States. All right.
60th presidential election since the first one in 1789.
So new. Such a low figure. It's astonishing.
It's actually shows that we've withstood many things in this country: depressions, recessions, wars, and we've always had peaceful succession, except for the last time. We had 11 times presidents have run for re-election, have been defeated, 11 times, and they've all left Washington. They've been unhappy, but they left Washington. They've turned the keys over to the White House, except for the 11th one, Trump.
Right.
He had a temper tantrum, and he's still having a temper tantrum.
Even Richard Nixon left in the
when he resigned
went smoothly.
That's right.
That's
right.
And then we just went on.
That's right. We often think that George Washington, to use that silly expression, is the father of our country. But the real father of the Constitution and of peaceful succession is John Adams, because he was the first president to lose. He lost to Thomas Jefferson. You may remember that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm old enough.
And he left. He wasn't happy. He was really bitter.
Yeah.
But he left.
Yeah.
And that actually was the first precedent and that kept us going until Trump. And I think that once Trump is defeated, we will have shed that kind of attitude about rigged elections and so on. I'm hopeful.
Why do you think that people are voting for Trump?
You know, I tell you the truth, I ask myself that question all the time. My wife talks, yells at the TV, how could you be voting for him? And, you know, a lot of us, especially those of us who live in New York City and in Manhattan on the West Side, we can't fathom how this could happen. We know him here in New York. But, you know, there are a lot of people who feel that the government is not taking care of them and they're not being responsive to them. And they see him as a disruptor and they support him for that.
But is that because they don't understand the government?
They may not understand the government, but they are our fellow Americans.
Where are they learning about government?
They're in the same place that you and I are learning.
No, they didn't do it.
Well, you're saying that they didn't learn it well.
Were you taught civics in high school or grade school?
I don't know if it was called civics,
Yeah.
but, you know, we learned it. They learned it too. But the lessons they take from it are different. They're in a different position. Let's try to be objective about this. There are like almost 80 million people who are going to vote for him. They're not all crazy. They're not all stupid. They're not all un-American. They have a feeling that the Democratic Party or the government is not taking care of him, not being responsive. It may be false notions on their part, but that's what they feel. And that's why they're voting for him. And we need to respect the fact that people make different choices for a variety of reasons, even though we can't imagine why how they ever could vote for him, but they do.
I think about this all the time. And I'm still reading the real newspaper, you know, a paper.
Yes, so do I.
But I'm reading an early edition, so I'm in a way a day behind.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
so
I know
ridiculous.
exactly what you mean.
And it costs a lot of money also. It's ridiculous.
But
Anyway,
it's hard
but I
to-
can't give up that whole thing. But
I'm with you.
there's less and less local news in the paper. So people are not getting the kind of information they should about their communities and what's happening locally. And you feel, I think, more attached to a local community in a way that draws you in more to the public sphere. So now we have more and more diversified sources online. And they become, as these new news services come in, these non-for-profits and everything, they become one-issue or two-issue news services. So you're not getting a complete picture, and people are more and more dependent on what they see on television, on cable news and stuff.
And there's a lot of disinformation.
So it portends very poorly for the future.
Well, you know, I agree with you, but every generation has said that. When you think about it, before, in the beginning of the country, newspapers were partisan vehicles. They spread lies all over the place. When radio came in, people said, well, how can anybody, you know, trust what's going on radio? The same with TV. Now we have many, many sources of news on the internet, and there's a lot of disinformation. And people, you take Fox News, they lie about what's going on. And you have China and Russia and other non-state
Manipulating
actors
everything. Yeah.
manipulating the quote-unquote news on the internet. So you asked me a moment ago about how these 80 million people can vote for this guy, and part of it has to do with the way they feel in terms of the responsiveness or not of the government, but part of it is based upon they believe
What
a
they're
lot of this
learning.
nonsense that's on the internet, on all these sources. They turn on Fox and they listen to this and they believe it.
He's crazy. The thing the other day with the women, I'm going to take care of you. Relax. I mean, it was outrageous.
It is outrageous. And it's like it makes you want to scream at the TV,
Totally.
scream at the papers,
Yeah.
because it's what he's saying on one hand makes no sense, on the other hand is a bunch of lies, and taking it another step, it's very dangerous.
Totally.
And if he wins, the survival of the republic is at stake here and will be threatened. There's no question about it. I don't need to be nonpartisan in that respect. It's true that there's a real difference between a candidate who supports the Constitution and a candidate who has said he's willing to tear it down.
Does the cost of campaigning and the money that gets involved, is that partially responsible for the behavior of elected officials?
Well,
Who seem to have lost their core values.
I'm not sure that it's the money. There are certain kinds of people who are attracted to run for public office, and you have to, analyze each person at a time. It's not monolithic, but there are people who can, develop the kind of hubris once they're in office that's very destructive. And we see this in New York City, and we see it nationally, and we see it throughout the country. Most public officials are good people and want to do the right thing. You may agree with them, you may disagree with them, but they want to do the right thing for the most part.
They used to.
Well, you think that most of them don't? I
I'm
don't
thinking
think
about the
that's-
members of the Republican Party.
Well, obviously, the members of the Republican Party who castigated Trump for the insurrection had a quote-unquote change of heart because they're opportunists.
Yeah.
And then they denied the fact that Biden won, even though the evidence is crystal
So
clear.
that's what I'm asking, is do you think it's the cost of running, that they're afraid of losing their jobs?
They're afraid of losing the job, but it's not about the money. It's about the fact that we have, when you look at the Congress people in the Republican Party, because we have gerrymandered districts, which means most of the congressional districts are safe seats. They're either safe for the Republicans or safe for the Democrats. So the Republicans were antagonized by what Trump did on January 6th. The reason they came around is they're afraid of primaries from people who are really crazy Republicans. And they want to hold on to their jobs. It's not about the money. It's about holding on to their job. And they're afraid of being attacked from the right. Just like there are some Democrats who are afraid of being attacked by the left in their primaries. So I don't think it's a money issue. I think it's the fact that most elected officials see as their number one priority getting reelected. Well, if that's what you focus on, you're going to make bad decisions pretty often.
Is that, you ran for office.
Yeah, somebody beat me. Oh, I think it was you.
But you never, you ran for office because with specific beliefs, right? And that
Exactly.
you wanted to do something positive.
Right.
But I don't think
And so did you. That's the reason
Yeah.
you ran.
Right. But I don't think people necessarily do that anymore. I'm not
Some
sure.
people do, some people don't.
So, polling, the polls, it gets more and more complicated, right? Do you know how the polling goes? How do they do it now?
They do it pretty much the same way as they've always done it. They try to figure out a universe of people that is a cross-section of whoever they're, trying to, in the race that they're analyzing. And so if you have a poll of registered voters and you get some conclusions in a presidential race, well, registered voters is the wrong kind of universe. You have to look at likely voters rather than registered voters. So whenever we see polls of registered voters and what the percentages are, it's meaningless. So you need to go to likely voters. And then
Likely voters are voters who have voted before.
who have
in a
voted
recent
before,
election.
not only voted before, but voted multiple times, that they are steady voters. But you really have to then factor in people who want to go to the polls for the very first time because they're energized either on one side or the other. So if you just go to likely voters, people who have voted for 3 or 4 times, then you're missing out on people who might go to the polls for the very first time. So you have to be careful. Not only that, but then you have to actually figure out if there's some hidden issues, like, for example, in this presidential race. There are people who are going to vote for Trump or stay home because they can't vote for Kamala, either because of sexism or racism. Now, that won't come out in a poll. People are not going to admit that. And so there's this extra factor that that a pollster needs to try to figure out when they're calling people, when they're creating a universe to try to get a more or less accurate result. Very difficult to do when there are issues like sexism and racism.
Are they calling both landlines and cell phones?
Yes, yes.
And does that have any impact?
I don't think it has any impact anymore because most people have cell phones at this point. So I think that the fact that a lot of people don't have landlines, or the fact that we don't answer our landlines, I don't think that that matters. I think that they've gotten to a point where they can really reach the kind of people they need to in order to analyze how people are feeling. But what I'm saying about the hidden sexism and racism, that doesn't come out. And we've seen in election after election where there's this hidden, we've generally seen it in local races, but we saw it in the Hillary race as well, where those kinds of feelings don't come out in a poll. And so we're all dealing with incomplete, inadequate information if we're paying attention to those polls.
The Times reported that Harris is not doing as well in the southern states. Is that racism? Can we deduce that?
I'm not sure what it is.
Is there something wrong with a newspaper conducting a poll and then making their poll the subject of headlines? I'm sounding like I'm down on the Times, and I have to say I have not been very happy with them. But
why haven't you been happy with them?
Because I think that they have been, I can't figure it out.
Well, so
I think they have treated Trump
as a normal candidate.
As a normal person.
Yeah, I think the Times has done that, and most newspapers have done that.
Yeah.
And the cable news stations, to some degree, have done that as well. Not Fox,
exactly.
but CNN has done that as well.
Right.
As if like Kamala and Trump are equivalent,
right? Yeah.
At equal time, and well, what Kamala will change her mind about a particular issue.
She won't meet with the press.
Right. And
What
so
a
that becomes a big issue, and the fact that he's raving about some ridiculous story that he has in his head, has no plans, and wants to tear down the Constitution.
And they pick up his
They're not the
arguments.
same.
Is this unlike any election you've ever been in?
Well, it is, and the reason it is.
Does it most closely resemble the reform movement's internal elections?
No. What we have here is a real, very serious, potentially dangerous situation, because we have a major party candidate who has told us that he doesn't, I don't even think he's ever read the Constitution, but he wants to tear it down.
Right.
This Project 2025 that the Heritage Foundation has put in writing, that's his people. And they're going to hollow out all the agencies of civil service people who work there, they're lifers, all they want to be is public servants, take them all out and have people sign, either literally or figuratively, sign pledges to Trump. Well, that's not the way to run a government. And he has a variety of suggestions to really make the United States government, the federal government, reflective of him, as opposed to dealing with the problems.
How he's going to use the different agencies to do it.
That's right.
But that brings up a very basic point that you and I think share, and that is the virtue of public service and the virtue of government, and how important it is. And how important the whole, not administrative, but the civil service, how important.
Right, and it's not just the civil service. I'll tell you, one of the most interesting and best experiences I've had as a lawyer was when I started working for the New York State Attorney General, our friend Andrew Cuomo. And what I discovered was that office has hundreds and hundreds of lawyers who have been there forever. They are so dedicated, and I think you would find that in the Corporation Counsel's office as well. We have many lawyers who, and non-lawyers, who really believe that what they're doing is important and love doing it. That's really the backbone of the legal system, and that's the backbone of the agencies in the federal government and the state government, the city government, of people who are dedicated. They don't get anything, they don't get a large salary, they don't get recognition, but they believe, and I think rightly so, that they're making a contribution. Those are the real public servants.
I worked at the Port Authority, and it's the same kind of thing. These are people who are looking at the port and all the different airports. It's an incredibly rewarding and exciting kind of thing.
It is, it really is.
Basic. The other part that we have now is the Supreme Court and the pollution of the court system that the Republicans have managed to do. That's a threat that's new and very different, isn't it?
It's really terrible. And they stole a seat by not even allowing a hearing on Merrick Garland, even though it was a year before the election. And Obama was not strong enough to demand that Garland got a hearing and got confirmed. Lyndon Johnson would never have stood for that. He would have made certain that that Senate did what it was supposed to do. And then when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, they shoved Amy Coney Barrett through, even though voting had already started. So they were cynical, they were opportunists. They took over the Supreme Court in a way that we're seeing decision after decision that is such a disservice to the people of this country. The Roe v. Wade, the immunity for the president, no matter what the president does, it's crazy, it's ridiculous. And even Biden now, who was against any kind of real reform for the Supreme Court, because he's such an institutionalist, even he has said we need to reform the Supreme Court, maybe term limits on Supreme Court justices, because it's not in the Constitution that they have to serve forever. And so I think that that's important. But that, even if there's a political will in Congress to do so, if the Democrats take over the House and retain the Senate, and if there's political will to reform the Supreme Court, it's going to take a while for that to happen. And until then, we're going to suffer under this conservative, and using the word conservative isn't even precise, because they're radical conservatives, and they've been destroying the fabric of our legal system.
Now, we've had barely, and we don't have any time to talk about the Electoral College.
Well, let's just abolish it.
Exactly. But how do we do that?
It has to be a constitutional amendment. They came up with this cockamamie idea in 1787, and we're living with it. In every other election, it's whoever gets the most votes wins. If we didn't have an electoral college, we wouldn't have a close election right now. Right. Kamala Harris would be running away with it, because it's clear she's going to get millions of votes more than he will. That's clear.
But the Senate is also a question, isn't it?
The Senate is also an idea from 1787. The fact that Wyoming has the same 2 votes as New York and California, it violates one person, one vote. But if you think it's difficult to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College, it's worse
to get rid of
the Senate, to have an amendment in the Constitution to, let's say, abolish the Electoral College, you need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the states. That's really, really hard. To get rid of the United States Senate, you need 100% of the states, because every
Right.
senator has to agree to it. Well, when is that going to happen? My great-grandchildren won't even see that.
So we're in so are you optimistic about this election?
I choose to be optimistic.
I am.
Optimism and dread.
Are we
I
just
choose to be
naturally
optimistic.
Are we just naturally optimistic? I can't imagine that we don't come out of this election with a. And I'm.
We have to be optimistic.
gonna
You know
lose?
why we have to be optimistic? Because the people who are watching you right now want optimism. And maybe the key to this election is Taylor Swift. Because if we get all these kids to come out and vote, all these young people who have never voted before, if she gets them out, God bless her.
All right. After Election Day, you come back and we talk some more.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
CUNY TV now has an app. Downloading the app will let you watch any show, including mine, at your convenience.